Hey, good morning. It's French Hill up in Washington, D.C. this week. We're voting this week. We had the President's State of the Union, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to see what's on your mind. This morning was always inspirational. This was the 67th National Prayer Breakfast held in Washington. It started back during the Eisenhower administration when Dwight Eisenhower told his friends in the Senate and the House that he felt like he really had a lonely job down at the White House, and they created the concept of the National Prayer Breakfast, where House members and senators would get together with the President and have breakfast and pray for leadership in our country and pray for our country and all of our citizens. And so that tradition has continued now for 67 years, and today we had over 3,000 people at the Washington Hilton. That's the hotel where President Reagan was shot coming out back in 1981. And President Trump spoke to 3,000 people from 140 countries. I had as my guest Mayor Frank Scott, our new mayor in Little Rock, who's been my friend for a long time, and it was great to be together and share that prayer breakfast. And we got to sit with a wonderful businessman from Jerusalem, a young man who sells energy, is in energy trading, who lives in Kiev, Ukraine, and then a delightful man who's a Buddhist priest in China and lives in a very remote region along the Vietnamese border with China. So we had you can imagine the engaging conversation that we had at breakfast. And then we had an inspirational talk, not only from the President of the United States, but also about ending human trafficking and human slavery around the world, which was a real theme at the breakfast. And the United States and the United Kingdom are working together with other countries to have the ways and means to free the 40 million people that are estimated in the world to still be part of slavery and human trafficking around the world. So it was an inspirational breakfast. So thanks for jumping on Facebook, and I thought I'd do some questions. George asked the question, who's your favorite president and why? And that's an easy one. It's one I like to talk about. I give talks about him kind of all over the country. Got coming up one this Monday here in Washington. My favorite president is Theodore Roosevelt, who was the 26th president. And I admired Teddy Roosevelt because of his personal energy, his high intellect, his willingness to get out in front of an issue and represent change. And he was at the time the youngest elected president that we had in the country, and he became president when William McKinley was assassinated in 1901. And so he ushered in the 20th century. He was our first truly 20th century president, born just before the Civil War. He wasn't a Civil War veteran, which is one reason why he was so excited to go and enlist as a volunteer and fight in America's Spanish-American War and lead the famous charge up San Juan Hill to San Juan Heights, where he won long after his death, won the Congressional Medal of Honor for that work. So he's an amazing man. I encourage everybody to read about Teddy Roosevelt and his legacy. It's very unusual for a president to have the Medal of Honor, but also have the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in the early 20th century, ending the war between Russia and Japan. So TR is my favorite president, and I encourage folks to get out and read about his life and the lessons he had for all of us. Sarah asks, do you support President Trump in calling a national emergency at the southern border? So, and I assume by her question she means calling a national emergency and then spending money by executive power to build border barrier, for example, or the border wall. You know, I really don't support that. I don't believe in executive actions that go beyond the power of Article 1, the power of the Congress. So I would not have supported that when President Obama would do it or President Trump. It's not a political thing per se. It's that I believe in the Article 1 power of our Constitution. And I think Congress over the years has really delegated, which they can't technically do under the Constitution. Too much authority to the executive branch. I didn't like President Obama's overreach on immigration through the extensive nature of his DACA proposal. I thought that was unconstitutional. And I'm not sure that declaring a national emergency in this instance to build border barrier through our military is a good idea either. It's Congress that should do the job of listening to all the American people and designing the security that we need along the southwest border, which includes the border barrier. I've been to the border 4 times, from San Diego all the way down to Laredo, Texas. I'm getting ready to go back down there in a few weeks. I know what we need to improve our immigration system and enhance our southwest border security, and I voted for those things in the House, and we need consensus to bring those measures back to the floor and pass real bipartisan support for border security and immigration reform. And I'm hopeful that this Appropriations Committee that's working with Democrats and Republicans, senators and House members, will reach an accord before next Friday and bring us a good piece of legislation that funds the small portion of the government that's not fully funded through September and resolves this need for additional money for our border security. It's an important homeland security issue. So Sarah, thanks for that question. Jim asks, what do you think is going to happen with the USMCA trade deal and how will it help Arkansas? And is it better than NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement? Jim, it's a good question. Just last weekend, I read the full text of the USMCA agreement and the notes that's now completed and being prepared to present to the House and Senate for approval. And I read it with a sort of a current view of what's going on in trade between Canada and Mexico and the U.S. And I also read it from the point of view of what we put in place in the late 1980s and early 1990s when NAFTA was ratified and put in place by President Clinton after being completed the negotiations during the George H.W. Bush administration. Actually worked on that agreement back during my days working in Bush 41's administration. So this agreement is an improvement over NAFTA. Let's talk about why. It includes President Trump's goals to have more U.S. content in manufactured goods between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So that's number one. Number two, it protects intellectual property in the right way, in a modernized way from 1994. We didn't have the internet in 1994 as an international delivery mechanism. We didn't have digitization of data and intellectual property in 1994. So we have expanded it for the use of data and tariff-free transfer of data and intellectual property through the internet in the 3 countries. This is a very big improvement. We've improved the labor goals for Mexico that were really left pretty silent back in 1994. That's a positive for the Mexican people, and I think it's good for the North American free trade zone. It has the same kind of good things for agriculture, manufacturing that NAFTA did. So it's really a modernized approach to NAFTA. And the new name is USMCA, United States, Mexico, and Canada Agreement. And I believe that on balance, it is an improvement. And if anybody watching has some specific questions they'd like to ask about the new agreement, I hope you'll email my office at hill.house.gov. We're happy to research those differences for you. But it's very important to Arkansas. Jim asked, how does it affect Arkansas? Canada and Mexico are the source or the recipient of most all of Arkansas's trade. They're our biggest trading partners, both for agriculture like poultry and rice, as well as a lot of our manufactured goods. So we want a good, well-designed U.S. Mexico and Canada trade agreement, and I believe this is an improvement over NAFTA, and we'll see how it goes in the Senate and House approval process. Joe asks, I saw on Facebook today, meaning yesterday, that you met with some veterans. Who were they and where did they serve? Well, this was pretty neat. Our whole office got to meet the World War II veterans, the D-Day veterans that President Trump brought to the State of the Union Tuesday night. And if you haven't watched the President's State of the Union speech, you can go catch it online, and you'll see him pay tribute to these two brave, amazing, alert guys who came to the office, and we had a chance to visit with them. One was in Airborne, and one was landing on the beach at D-Day. Shot multiple times, Purple Heart, Croix de Guerre from France, and these two men are the epitome of what it's great to be an American. They helped free Europe. They helped free the misery of the victims of the Holocaust. They survived this brutal landing on Omaha Beach or landing in Airborne. Let me tell you something. The Pathfinders and the men who jumped out of those airplanes around 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. in the middle of the night on D-Day before we hit the beach, they had no idea what they were landing in. Some of them, as you know in the famous movies, landed in the middle of a town square occupied by Germans. Some landed in apple orchards and their parachutes were tangled in trees right in the middle of a German encampment. And a lot of them just didn't make it. And on Omaha Beach, we know about the slaughter on Omaha Beach. Go look at the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, and you tell me you don't know what horror is. But one of the men we met yesterday survived that landing, and out of his platoon of 40 guys, 7 survived the D-Day landing and the advance to Germany. So these are true American heroes. I was so proud President Trump brought this greatest generation to the gallery in the House. We're losing our World War II vets, so many a day, and what an honor to recognize them and be with them. He was an inspiration to everybody on my staff. And my dad was in the Army Air Corps in World War II, and my father-in-law landed in Europe after D-Day and went all the way to free Buchenwald concentration camp. So I honor the memory of my father-in-law and my dad's service, but it was terrific to see these men. Go read their story that's connected to the State of the Union speech. It's inspirational, and it was cool to meet them. Pete asks, what's the latest news about the American being held in Syria? I saw that you invited his son to the State of the Union as your guest. I did, Pete. Thanks for asking. A lot of people in the trauma of the war in Syria since 2011, it's just such a nightmare that people sort of lost track with what's going on. You have 500,000 people killed in Syria, 300,000 held in Assad's prisons being tortured. No one's heard from them. You have 5 million refugees on the run outside the country in Turkey or Jordan in these huge refugee camps, or off trying to find their way into Europe. And it's just a gruesome situation that was allowed to blossom by some mistakes, in my opinion, about how Russia and President Obama handled the civil war when it broke out in Syria. And we are reaping the whirlwind for those errors. So the Kamalmuz family, Dr. Kamalmuz, went to the UA Little Rock, met his wife and married in Little Rock, had their first child in Little Rock, and he's a psychotherapist. He does a lot of trauma therapy for people in war-torn or tragic regions, including he helped families in America after Katrina. Majid is an American citizen. His family are American citizens. And I was proud to have his son, Khalid, come to the House gallery and listen to President Trump's speech because I thought it was important that we continue to call attention to their fate. He is not alone. There are other Americans held in Syria. And so the work we've done since January 30th has brought the attention of Majid's capture and being held for 2 years now in Assad's jail, and the other Americans who are held in Syria. And I was very pleased yesterday that President Trump said he's committed to helping get these Americans out of Syria. It's been something he's worked hard on and prided himself personally on engaging in getting Americans out of tough, captive situations. We had the pastor at the prayer breakfast this morning from Turkey that's been held there in untold conditions for, I think, a decade or so in Turkey. He came to the prayer breakfast today, and President Trump was able to talk about again his commitment to bringing our Americans home where they're detained. Dr. Kamamaz was over attending a funeral for a family member. He'd been working in Lebanon. He planned an appropriate visit to Damascus for that funeral, double checking and triple checking how he was going to go about that. He was admitted to the country with his American passport, checked into the hotel, and was picked up the next day by Assad's thugs. So we're praying for his safety. We hope that he's healthy. We hope that he's being treated respectfully in captivity in Syria, and we want him to come home soon. And that's why I had Khalid come and be a part of the State of the Union to carry this message to President Trump. And was so pleased to hear President Trump's response yesterday that's on the front page today of the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Linda asks, she would like my support for the Military Surviving Spouses Equity Act, which is H.R. 553. And she says, do I have a position on that bill? I do, Linda. It's an important piece of legislation for fairness. It allows survivors to get the money that's due them from DOD's survivor benefit. I support that. It's important. There are about 900 surviving spouses in Arkansas that would benefit from this law change. And I appreciate you asking me about it. And I'll continue to advocate for fairness when it comes for survivor benefits from the DOD. And thanks for asking that question. Stephanie asks, how do you plan on initiating the president's goal of, quote, continuing to lower drug costs, close quote? So this is a real frustration for all Americans. And honestly, it's a big frustration for America's independent-owned pharmacies, too. Because our prescription drug business, which is the biggest and best in the world when it comes to our therapies, we love the innovation of our drug industry. Golly, we love it. We love that it extends life. We love that it treats cancer. We love that it helps people have a better quality of life with a chronic condition. But Americans are so frustrated by the cost of these drugs and the understanding of why one drug costs more than the other due to a lack of transparency. So I support President Trump's efforts, at Part D reforms and things of that nature that will make drug prices better and simpler. And I support the effort of our community pharmacists to try to get transparency on how the drug distribution system works in this country, where I think a lot of the profit is caught up there. And it's not exposed to the consumer who's going to the drugstore, and it's certainly not fair to our pharmacists that we count on for advice, counsel, and help with our prescriptions. I mean, sometimes you'll have a pharmacist say, hey, I can't fill that for you. I can't take the loss. And yet it's an expensive drug for you, the consumer, through your insurance. So this system really is a mess, even though we greatly appreciate the innovation and life-saving nature of it and life-improving nature of it. So I'm glad the president's focused on this. I've been in Congress 4 years. We really haven't had a president step up and focus on this issue that I hear about from my constituents all the time, and I certainly hear about from our community pharmacies all the time as well. So hopefully we'll make some improvements that will make pricing more transparent for you, make pricing more fair to our distribution system, like our community pharmacies, and that we'll understand better get competitiveness in there in pricing, and make sure that we really have competitive prices for drugs. You know, we saw the fight over the pricing of drugs that aren't even protected by intellectual property anymore, where people were raising price for important drugs. And we want to get behind that and make sure we have competition so that people have fair prices. Thanks for the question. Billy asks, what about support for Israel? What are you doing to protect our most important ally in the Middle East? Well, I appreciate Billy's question. We have a very loyal ally in Israel in the most complex, dangerous region of the world. Israel is a democracy. Israel is an innovator in business. In fact, drug therapy that we were just talking about, IT, they have been an innovative partner for America's defense by having some of the best ingenuity in defensive weapon systems development that we've collaborated on with the Israelis. So we have a strong ally in Israel. And likewise, Israel has been a strong ally with us, with Egypt, following Camp David. I mean, the Egyptian and the Israelis are working together to fight terrorism in the Sinai of Egypt and in and around the Gaza Strip. America is an ally for America's view of religious tolerance and the effort to fight ISIS and terror. And probably most importantly, they're a major ally of ours, along with other Gulf countries, Arab countries, in blocking Iran's insatiable desire to dominate the whole Middle East with its missile technology, something that was not dealt with in the Iran deal. It's why Democrats and Republicans during the Obama administration said, no, the Iran deal is a bad deal. It's not going to stop nuclear development in Iran, and it doesn't handle any of the problems that Iran causes. It allowed them to obtain ballistic missile technology, increase their reach of missiles that can now dominate completely Israeli airspace and reach Europe. It doesn't stop them from funding Hezbollah and terror all over Lebanon, Syria, the Gaza. It doesn't stop them from participating with Hezbollah in the drug trade and the drug cartel in South America. It just doesn't rein in Iran's, as I say, insatiable desire to eliminate Israel from the earth and dominate the Middle East. And that is why Iran, I think properly, saw President Trump back out of the nuclear arrangement, and we are seeking a more comprehensive arrangement that corrects this bad behavior in Iran. Israel is our ally in that work. Our friends in Europe are allies in that work. And it's hard work, but we're committed to it. I've been to Israel, and I've seen and met with their students. I've met with people all over the country. I have great admiration for how they've built their society. And we need a two-state solution there that preserves the rights of territorial integrity of the Israeli people and allows the Palestinian people prosperity and opportunities to work. And you know, for a lot of people that are concerned about that, don't forget about 500,000 Palestinians cross into Israel every day to work and have a living. And so there's a lot of work to be done there, but we have to do it together with our allies in the region, and one of those strongest ones is Israel. So thanks for that question. Steve asks, what can be done to allow the VA to compete with the private sector? How does the VA compete with the private sector with salary caps and inability to hire physicians? and how can veterans get better access to these services? So this is something that Congress has grappled with now for going on 5 years, when they had a backlog of and a huge service problem across many VA regions, where there were long waiting lists to get a primary care visit or a specialty care visit, or to schedule a surgery, or to have a drug screening, or to have a behavioral health test, or to even get an eye check and go see the optometrist to fill an eye prescription. And so Congress back in 2014, before I was in Congress, created something called the Choice Program, which was to allow veterans, if they couldn't get service within a certain number of days, or if they lived away from the convenience of a VA health center, to get services from a private physician or clinic, and then have the VA reimburse that clinic. That's in the early stages. It's continuing to roll out. President Trump signed laws into effect last year that improves that, gets some kinks out of that system. And veterans are giving their feedback on what they think the best way is to have an effective VA that does a lot of very critical work for our combat injured veterans and those with chronic morbidities connected to their service, versus some routine work that might be done more conveniently elsewhere. So this is a work in progress. I urge you to reach out to our office if you have ideas, if you're a veteran and you've seen things that work or don't work in the Choice Program. We'd love to hear from you at hill.house.gov. But this is an evolving situation that I think will take place over a number of years, where we have the best of the services we do at the VA, but we provide convenience where necessary through a VA clinic or through the private system to get better service, better competition, and better results for our veterans. And so thanks for that question. Last one, the bowl is empty. I know there's applause all across the internet. Nancy asks, what did you think about the president's speech at the State of the Union? I thought it was a good effort on his part. I like it when a president comes, talks about the things that we've accomplished that are good for the American people, like tax reform, like regulatory reform, like our strong efforts to improve federal funding and engagement on mental health services and the opioid crisis that affects every community in our country, that he started work on some major trade deals during the first 2 years. That was encouraging. And he also challenged everybody in Congress and everybody at home, I think, choose greatness. Choose greatness. Work together and let's accomplish the things that we're setting out to do that are important, where we have common ground. And one of those is making sure that we keep our government funded, that we try to have this economy growing as fast as we can. It was an incredible jobs number. Over 300,000 jobs were created in January, almost double what the expectation was. And the third quarter GDP was reported at about 3.5%. And I remind people, in the 10 years after the financial crisis during the Obama administration, our GDP only averaged 1.8% growth per quarter. So the last 2 years, we've seen that step up in economic growth and economic prosperity for families in this country. So I'm glad he pointed those things out, but I'm glad he turned to the future and talked about things that we need to work on together. Continue work on opioids, continue to work on the economy. Let's bring some of these trade negotiations to a conclusion, like the question we had on U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Let's work on other things that benefit our families, like lowering the cost of prescription drugs, making sure people with pre-existing conditions have access to coverage. Let's finish some of these big, tough challenges, like reforming our immigration system and making sure we have great border security. You know, there's a lot of common ground here. You don't know it watching cable TV at night. I know that. I recommend you read a book or stream a movie on I won't name your favorite streaming service, but you know, do something besides getting caught up in the vortex of negativity out there on cable news. People here are working hard to find solutions to our problems. And he hearkened back to Americans have done that before, from saving Europe to putting a man on the moon to ending the horrors of the Holocaust. So we as Americans can do anything we put our mind to it. And President Roosevelt always said, keep your feet on the ground and your eyes on the stars, and it's that kind of optimism that makes America a great place. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll do it again. And if you have more questions, send them to hill.house.gov. Have a great rest of the week.